So then we're joined with David from the Blue Moon podcast. Thanks a lot for coming on, David, giving your thoughts.
No problem.
Right. So obviously we're going to be talking about Wolves versus Manchester City this weekend. What are your thoughts, obviously as sort of an outsider, as a neutral, on Wolves? Obviously I'd imagine you've seen some of the transfers they've made and maybe seen obviously the start they've made to the Premier League. As a football fan in general, how do you think Wolves have started off and what do you think of the team and their prospects this season?
Well, I have a funny relationship with Wolves because my memories of Wolves growing up were always generally you beat us back in the day. So there was one, I remember one, a horrid one. We were pushing for promotion from it was the Division 1 at the time, what's now the Championship. And we've been in fairly good form. We rock up at Molineux and you stick four past us, and it just wasn't. I just remember that it was a horrid kind of time to always play Wolves and always. But I mean, you beat us on the opening day of that season as well at Main Road, and it was just. I just remember that old gold kit always used to stick right in the back of my throat because it was. You know, I didn't like it, and it always signified defeat. And then in the last kind of 3 or 4 years, I've really about turned on Wolves, and they've become kind of like one of my little favourite teams that I look out for. And then obviously we drew each other in the League Cup last season, and the performance that Wolves put in really impressed me. The promotion last season was one of the most impressive from the Championship as well. So it just all these little building blocks, and it kind of coincided as well. A friend from university is a Wolves fan, so there was like a little bit more of kind of an input that way. And so I've actually kind of grown to like Wolves now. And I have this thing where a lot of the things that I base opinions on teams with is how much I like the kit. And this season's Wolves kit, I think, is phenomenally good. So again, I'm sat there thinking that I don't particularly mind how they do. I must say I've been a little bit disappointed with how you've started the season. Looking at the fixtures, Leicester and Everton. I would have fancied you to get more than a point out of those two games, but I do think obviously the season's a long one, and it's not how you start, it's how you go on the course of the season. I don't think Wolves fans have too much to worry about. I do think you'll be a solid mid-table team, possibly even pushing towards the European places. Which for a newly promoted side is more than what you'd expect. I think they've been very savvy in the transfer market. I've been impressed with quite a few of the signings they've made, and I think this game at the weekend will be a tough game for City, no matter how good City have started and how well they played last season. We saw last season what Wolves could do when they came up against City, so I've no reason to believe that City will get an easy game at the weekend at all.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as you've said there, Wolves, I think at home this season, they've got to take advantage of those games. I mean, especially for the first part of the season, they're all going to be sellouts. The atmosphere is going to be rocking, and that's when Wolves really need to take advantage, especially against one of the best teams in the league in Manchester City at the moment. Obviously, City start to the season, they've already beaten Arsenal, they've very comfortably beat Huddersfield. What do you reckon for them this season? Will you be disappointed if Pep doesn't go on to retain the title, or do you think it's more of a push for European glory this year for Man City?
I think you have to be disappointed if he doesn't retain the title, given the manner in which they won it last season. This isn't. I mean, you look back at City's two previous Premier League titles. 2012, they won it on the last day with the last kick of the season. 2014, they didn't really win it. More Liverpool lost it in the last kind of few weeks. So there were much tighter races than they were last season. So Guardiola this season is starting off on a much higher base than Mancini and Pellegrini were when they came to defend their titles unsuccessfully. So I think if Guardiola doesn't manage it, then you do have to be disappointed with that. Ultimately, the club, I think, would prefer to see much more success on the European front as well. I think the fans are much more kind of looking at the league as the bread and butter. So there is that little bit of a culture clash like that. Again, though, in Europe last season, I would have fancied City to take on pretty much anybody in Europe last season, apart from Liverpool, and then they ran into Liverpool at just the wrong time. So this again, the Champions League is effectively a glorified cup competition with the best teams. You get lucky on the day you win the tie. You don't get lucky, you get knocked out. And I'm not going to sit here and say that City didn't deserve to go out to Liverpool last season, but a few moments of luck in those two legs, and it's a different story. So it's difficult to say, do you focus more on Europe? Because it's difficult to say that they can focus more on Europe. It is that there's a lot more put to chance in that. So ultimately, I would side with the fans and say that the Premier League is where City should be based. And again, you look at the teams that are trying to close the gap. You'd say Liverpool are probably the team that are most likely to have closed it.
Yeah.
How much are they going to throw away silly points this season? Because you don't fancy City to throw away that many points over the course of the campaign. Can Liverpool keep that pace? I'm not sure. So, with all that in mind, if he doesn't defend the title, then do you put say he doesn't defend the title, but he does win the Champions League? Then you've got a question to ask about how disappointing the season's been, obviously.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't defend the title, that I think is the first step towards where City should be this season. So I think if they've not got the title, then you would have to say you've kind of had a bit of a disappointing season, yeah.
So obviously we all know the City team full of world-class players, but say if you had to pick out 2 or 3 players that Wolves really need to look out for, players in form or players that you think can surprise a few of us, who would those Man City players be?
Again, it's difficult to say with the focus that's been on City's team. Yeah. It's also difficult to say what side Guardiola will pick. I don't know if you saw the line for the Huddersfield game. But when that came out, pretty much everybody that I know who does the podcast that was sat in the press box laughed and said, "Well, I don't know how this is going to look," because he named no natural right-sided players in that team, and it just didn't seem to have any sort of balance. And yet they went and put 6 past Huddersfield. So it's difficult to say what he'll play. My hunch will be that the player that won't get the credit he deserves this season is Bernardo Silva. Mm-hmm. He's last season he was slowly introduced into City's team. He was a wide player last year. This year he's been pretty much the focal point of the attack with in behind the strikers in the centre. And you load up the Fantasy League from last weekend, and all the points are going to Mendy for the assists and David Silva for the goal, Aguero for his hat-trick. Bernardo Silva got 2 points for the Fantasy League, yet he pulled the strings throughout that game, and he was the one that was dragging players all over the place. So when you look down at the cold hard facts, he doesn't really do that much. But when you look at the game and how things happened, then he was the one that was always on the ball, always moving people out of position and creating the space for the others to do the damage, much in the same way that David Silva was when he first arrived at City. So there's kind of that moment soon, I think we're going to see where the focal point of City's team becomes less on David Silva and more on Bernardo Silva. And he's certainly been one that I'd say has been going under the radar a little bit since he arrived. I mean, it's difficult to go under the radar at City because of the focus that they get, but he's, I'd say, probably the one. Aside from that, Leroy Sané has not been in the team that much, so maybe if he comes in, he could be one that really does try to get some impressive moments for the manager. Raheem Sterling is one that takes incredible flack for everything he does. Yet ultimately, City fans can see that he does pretty much everything that's right about this City team. And beyond that, you've maybe got one of the kids that could come in and surprise you. Maybe someone like Phil Foden or Brahim Diaz, who don't get a lot of starts in this team. And I'd actually be very surprised if Guardiola did start with one of them. But from the bench, they've certainly shown that they're up to being in this team.
So obviously we spoke about the current team. There's been a few rumours over the last week or so about City being interested in the very man Ruben Neves. Now obviously we could take obviously the rumours at the moment. The window's only just shut. We could take them with a pinch of salt. But Ruben Neves for about £60 million, David. For you as a City fan, would you be interested in that sort of deal? Would you be interested in Neves coming to the Etihad?
My experience in Neves is generally a couple of mates who are Wolves fans, one of which I work with, would quite often come over and say, "Did you see it at the weekend?" And he'll have scored another goal from 95 yards on the volley on the half. You just think, well, that's physically not possible. How's he done that? There was one last season that was, I can't remember who it was against, but it was utterly ridiculous.
Derby one, I think it was. Yeah.
Um, so, you know, I'm always wary of looking at players and going, well, I've seen what he can do in highlights packages, because everyone said the same of Giorgio Samaras when City signed him in 2006 and he was rubbish. So you're always a bit wary of that. One thing I would say is that Guardiola, and since Guardiola's come in, he's very, I don't think he's got, I can't think off the top of my head of any transfer that he's got wrong, or the club, because he's not in charge of the transfers.
Yeah.
Really. I don't really think that they've got anybody wrong since he's arrived. Plenty of people in the comments naming players that I've forgotten about. But so if they were to go for Neves, then I would fully trust the judgment that he's up there and able to compete in this City team. I'd like to see what he can do in the Premier League this season. He's one that I think has been generating a lot of headlines for all the right reasons in the Championship. And you know, the next stage is to basically go on and prove himself in the Premier League. Whether he's up to that or not, I think we'll see this season. Because I think back to that City team that had Berkovic and Benarbia and Sean Wright-Phillips in all creating headlines in what was City's Championship winning season. Then went on and did it again in the Premier League. So there's no reason why he can't do it, and no reason why he can't impress. I would be surprised if City went in for him so quickly, and I would also I'd actually feel a bit sorry for you guys, because I used to criticise when City weren't one of the rich teams going in buying players. I used to criticise all the big boys coming in and stealing players, and lo and behold, City have become one of those teams. So you know, I can't sit here in good conscience and say that I wouldn't feel a little bit sorry for going along and poaching some of the best players out there. But if he's up to the task, then City will. They proved with Mahrez, they'll keep going and keep going till they get the time.
I thought, you know, we never know. As I say, it might just be a rumour, but I thought I'd address it anyway. But obviously, the final thing, score prediction. What are you thinking for Saturday's game?
I hate this because I'm never very good at it. We do a charity bet on the show, and I'm notorious because I have one. I'm as one of the hosts. I have one every week, and I think I won the most money by virtue last season of having a prediction every week. But it was like by 20 quid. I'm just so bad at it. So I wouldn't say this is gospel. What I've gone for this week is 3-1 City, because I think Wolves will present a very tough test. I don't know how Wolves are going to set up for this game. When they came to the Etihad and last season, and it was a weird setup, because I think a lot of City fans criticised Wolves for effectively showing no ambition by parking the bus, and yet when you say that, you actually look at the best chances in the games. In the game,
they won, yeah.
Fell to Wolves. Yeah, there were 3 1-on-1s that were missed. So, you know, if Wolves were to park the bus and take the chances on the break, then they've got. I actually think they've got a good chance of causing City some damage. You certainly don't want to give City the space. But I wonder in a league game with City. I mean, Wolves rotated the team for the game last season as well as City, so it was two rotated teams. I wonder, with two teams playing their A game and playing their first team, if City just have a bit too much for Wolves this time around.
That's fair enough. And finally, if you want to plug away your stuff, obviously the podcast, your own Twitter and what have you, feel free.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at David Mooney. Some say I've got no imagination when it comes to that. So others, I defend it by saying I was just the first David Mooney on Twitter. That's it. We also do the Blue Moon podcast is every week. It's out every Friday throughout the season. So you can find it in all the usual podcast places. BlueMoonPodcast.com as well.
Yeah, as always, I'll put links to those in the description. But David, thanks a lot for jumping on today with us. Wolves fans, if you did enjoy this video, or Manchester City fans as well, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to our channel as well on YouTube, and we'll see you all very soon.